Hi, my name is Kaze and welcome to another Right Brain tutorial. So in part 2 of this UDIM tutorial, we're going to be moving into Substance Painter, where I can show you how our UDIMs are going to come across and some tips and tricks on how to deal with UDIMs in Substance Painter so you can kind of assign textures and do the things that you want to do in there. But before we jump into Substance Painter, I wanted to address a concern that one of you guys brought up in the comments from the last video, and that is, do UDIMs put additional stress on the render engine, i.e. if I use UDIMs, is that going to slow down my renders? And the answer to that is a little bit more complicated than it might seem, because several things have to do with how quickly a render engine actually, deals with, large textures and also with complex geometry. In my experience, large textures mostly affect a render engine's memory assignment, and as well as how quickly the render engine can load these textures into the RAM that it needs to be able to kind of access quickly. So because of that, if your render engine is GPU based and your GPU card only supports so much memory, then the size of your textures is going to affect your ability to be able to kind of use or render certain textures as you will. It will also affect the speed in the sense that the render engine will need a little bit more time to get more data into the memory of the graphic card. And because of that, yes, UDIM, there's a price to pay for UDIMs. I wouldn't worry about it too much, and as I showed you in my previous video, it's still a more efficient way of dealing with texture resolution than if you were just to expand your texture size to 8K or 16K or even larger. So anyway, I hope I answered that question in a bit of a roundabout way. So without further ado, let's jump into Substance Painter. Okay, so in Substance Painter, we're going to start with the first example from the previous video, which was that kind of sci-fi canister of sorts, that container. So I'm just going to go under File, I'm going to click New, and I'm going to select my FBX file that I exported from Houdini with our UDIM tiles. So that's what we want. And next I want to change the document resolution to maybe like 2K. This does not have anything to do with our final resolution of the textures that we're going to be exporting, because we can change that resolution at export time. This is more of a work format so that I can kind of see a little bit more clearly what's going on. I'm going to keep the normal map format at DirectX. However, depending on the render engine that you're using, you might have to switch it to OpenGL. I know, for instance, that if you're going to go back to Blender and you're going to use Cycles or Eevee, then OpenGL is the preferred format for that. I'm going to leave this compute space per fragment off. And here we get to the really, really fun part, okay? So starting in, I think, June of 2020, Substance Painter was finally able to allow us to work with UDIMs in the proper intended way, which is that we can now paint across different UDIM tiles. Before, believe it or not, you couldn't do that. So this is why it's opened up a lot of possibilities, and it's made using UDIMs that much more powerful. So what we want to do is we want to select this preserve UV tile layout per material and enable painting across tiles, okay? So this is the new mode, and it's definitely what we want to select, and it's also the default selection anyway. If the old way was to convert UV tiles into individual texture sets, which is not useful, at least not for my purposes, because it doesn't actually allow you to paint across different UDIM tiles. And in this particular case, we're going to want to do that. And I'm just going to click OK and allow Substance Painter to bring in this sci-fi canister of sort. In the previous video, if you go back, we ended up with a lot more UDIMs because I was kind of using a lot more resolution. We were kind of scaling the individual UV tiles by a larger factor, but I thought, for the sake of this tutorial, let's just keep things nice and simple. So I went back and I just kind of scaled them down so that they would all fit onto 4 UDIM tiles, and I think it's just going to make for a cleaner kind of workflow for this particular video. So the first thing I want to do is I want to compute occlusion maps and curvature and all the other things that allows Substance Painter to create some really cool smart materials and to do a lot of the heavy lifting for us. So so that's what I'm going to do first. I'm going to go in here and I'm just going to scroll all the way down and say bake mesh maps. And in here I'm just going to change the resolution. The default's 512, but once again I'm going to go to, I don't know, like 1K is probably sufficient, but I'm going to go to 2K. And I'm going to leave everything as is, except I'm going to uncheck the ID because we don't really have any material IDs for this particular mesh, so it's kind of like a waste of space, really. So on that note, I'm just going to click Bake Selected Maps and let Substance Painter do its magic. Okay, so Substance Painter is finished baking all this curvature map and ambient occlusion and normal world space and thickness and all this other stuff that it's going to need so that it's going to do a lot of the hard work for us. The first thing I want to show you guys is I'm going to go in here and kind of click on this paint node. We're going to assign this obnoxious red color, and I want to show you, this is the cool thing about the new Substance Painter, is you can see that we can kind of paint all over our model, and as I do so, here, let's get this out of the way, you'll see that our paint is being assigned to all the different UDIM tiles that correspond to that part of the surface. And this is a really cool new feature of Substance Painter that you couldn't do before. So now it gives us a lot of possibilities to be able to kind of really fine-tune the texture on our model and not have to worry about painting across UDIM tiles and Substance Painter not being able to do that. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of this guy right now because we don't want to have this graffiti look. But instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to go under my Smart Materials and I'm going to pick, I don't know, like let's try this steel paint. So I'm just going to click and drag it onto our mesh. And automatically it does a really good job because it's looking at the curvature, it's looking at like the world space, thickness, you know, ambient occlusion that it pre-baked into our model and assigning that in a smart way. So so this is really cool. It's given us like a really great starting point. And I'm not going to go too crazy, especially not with this particular example. But I do want to show you a couple cool things that you can do because of the ability to paint across different UDIM tiles. So so let's say that this is like a good starting point, and I'm gonna start with another paint layer, and this time I'm gonna change the color from red to, I don't know, something darker, and maybe we can go a little bit more on the brownish side, like some sort of dirt. And I'm gonna go under my brushes, I'm gonna click on the dirt brush. And now we have a dirt brush, and I'm going to go a little bit close and make this a little bit larger. And I'm just going to start painting on our, you know, like on our mesh directly. And don't judge me on this because, you know, I'm just doing this in a rush just to kind of show you guys the idea. Obviously, if this was something that I really cared about, I would go a little bit more carefully than this. But at the same time, you know, once again, like, I mean, I can paint across my UDIM tiles, I can keep my resolution, and I can get like, you know, a little bit more customization effect on my mesh. And if I wanted to kind of maybe like kind of accentuate or add a little bit more dirt on the bottom of our models, I can do that, and, you know, and basically just kind of say, okay, you know, like, this is going to do the trick for right now for what I want. Let's see. Let's add another paint layer, and this time what I want to do is I want to go under my search and I want to search for decals, and maybe I want to put like a warning. Maybe I don't know, maybe this thing is kind of like radioactive. It's a biohazard that is contained in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this bottom dirt, and this next one I'm just going to call it warning. So on this one, let's see, I want to go and drag my decal under stencil. I'm going to go in here and drag it in here. And we still have our dirt selected in the brush, which I don't want. So I'm just going to uncheck this. So now we have this nice decal here. Let me get this out of the way so we can see a little bit better. Let's see, what else do we want to do? Oh, change the color. So maybe we want this to be, I don't know, like an orange, or like maybe like more yellow. So it's kind of like this nice, bright kind of way of warning people, hey, don't mess with whatever is inside this container. What I want to do is I want to change my view from perspective to orthographic, so we have a more kind of flattened sort of look. I want to rotate my model, and let's say that this is maybe like the front of our container, and I'm just going to zoom in considerably and place this, I don't know, like somewhere around here. Maybe it could be even larger. Click stamp on it, boom. And now we have a warning. I'm just going to do it maybe on the other side as well, so that we have some symmetry to our model. So I'm just going to go back in here, line it up, zoom in, press to apply it, and now we have this decal on our model, which is cool because, once again, it crosses boundaries of our UDIM tiles. So if I go back and see our 2D, 3D split view, you will see here that even though part of this is on this UDIM tile, but there's another part that's on this UDIM tile, and I think there's even some parts that are in here. So, so this is a very, very flexible way of working with a mesh in Substance Painter, and to work with different UDIM tiles and basically consider them all, the same surface. So this is a good strategy to give us ultimately a great degree of resolution for our object, and it's going to, allow us to kind of have some really, really nice tight close-ups to this canister for our renders, and the textures are going to look good. So on that note, let's move on to the second example of our UDIM tiles where things are a little bit more complex. Let's do the same thing that we did with the canister. I'm going to hit New. I'm going to select, and this time I'm going to select this Interceptor FBX file that I exported from Houdini. I'm going to click Open, and I'm going to once again set my document resolution to 2K. Because it looks nicer, and once again I'm going to go with the default, which is preserve UV tile layout per material and enable painting across tiles. So I'm going to click OK and let Substance do its thing as it loads in the model, and here we have our little Interceptor spaceship that we were working on in Houdini. Just like with the Sci-fi container, I simplified things a little bit because for the sake of this tutorial, we didn't want to end up with, I think we had like 15 different UDIM tiles in the previous example. So what I did is I simply combined our entire hull into one UDIM tile. Then what I did is I have another UDIM tile that represents what I think are all going to be like the metal parts of our mesh, such as like the turret, the gun, the engine, and some of this little detail. On the third UDIM tile, what I did is I just left that tile exclusively for the glass and things that we want to be transparent. And last but not least, what I did is on the final UDIM tile, I used that for our, what I'm calling bombs. I'm still not really quite sure what this is. Maybe they're like some engines that kind of point downward, but anyway, but I thought that maybe we would give them a different color. So just like in the canister example, the first thing that we want to do is we want to bake some mesh maps so that we have Substance Painter compute all of our curvature and AOs and all this other stuff. So once again, I'm going to click on here. I'm going to increase the resolution to 2K, and I'm going to uncheck the ID because once more, we don't really have any sort of material ID for this particular mesh. And we're back, and Substance did its thing, and now we have some nice little ambient occlusion and curvature and all this other stuff computed into our mesh. So as you can see here, with this 4 UDIM tiles, this is a little bit different than the previous example with the Sci-fi canister. And the reason why this is different is because I'm not just taking a single set of UV islands that are kind of randomly assigned to different parts of my mesh and kind of scattering them across 4 different tiles. But in this particular case, each tile represents a very specific part of our mesh. Okay? Let me show you a little bit what I mean and what the challenges are working this way and what are some of the solutions that you can kind of utilize. So I'm gonna right now just go to a 3D view only so that we can kind of see a little bit more clearly what's going on. And I'm just gonna go to, once again, my smart materials, and let's start maybe with this, I don't know, steel paint damaged type of thing, okay? So I'm gonna click and drag it onto our mesh, and Substance is gonna do its thing, and it's going to assign this all over the place. And this is kind of not really what we want, because maybe what we want to do is we really want this particular material on the fuselage and the wings, but we don't necessarily want it on our guns. We definitely don't want it onto our canopy, this this glass material, and we don't want it on our bombs. So what can we do in Substance Painter to limit where this smart material is being applied? Okay, let me pull up my layers. And what we have here that is new in Substance Painter that we didn't have before is this set of masks. And I'm just going to show you what this does. When I click on here, now we have the option of going and selecting our UDIM tiles that we don't want this particular material assigned to. Okay, let me show you here with our split 2D and 3D. So right now, like, we want this stuff on the main fuselage. However, we don't want it on our turret and our little metal details. So I'm just going to click on here and uncheck that. We also definitely don't want it on our glass. So I'm going to click on here, and that's going to mask the glass. It's going to keep it from having this material applied to it. And we don't want it on our bombs. So we can click on this guy and uncheck that. And now, if we go back, let me go back to the single view here. I should probably learn the shortcut for that. Too many shortcuts, guys, like too many to think about. That's why, like, sometimes I just have to, like, use the mouse. But what we have now is a material that's being applied exclusively to the parts that I want, okay? And we are using these UDIMs as a way of masking certain pieces, parts of our model. And if we did our organization properly in Houdini, like I showed you in the first video, then we will have a great deal of flexibility in Substance Painter to be able to assign the materials exactly where we want them. Let's do something. Let's get rid of this, and I'm just also gonna get rid of this paint layer. And I want to show you another trick that I think is really useful for this particular methodology of working with UDIMs that are assigned to a specific part of your mesh. So we're going to create a folder, and what we're going to do is we're going to use this folder as a pre-made mask set, that then anything that goes inside this folder gets applied only to the parts that I want, okay? And this is going to be really, really powerful. So I'm going to once again go to the split view, and I'm going to name this fuselage, okay? So this is going to be everything, the parts of our mesh that are the fuselage and nothing else. And basically I'm going to do the same thing that I did before with the smart material, except this time I'm going to do it in this particular folder. So I'm just going to click on this guy, and I'm going to say I want whatever material I apply to this fuselage to be on this UDIM tile, but not on this one, not on this one, and not on this one. So let's do it again with another folder, and this time I'm going to say, I'm going to call this metal bits. Okay, metal bits. And same thing here, I'm going to click on this masking material, and this time we don't want this stuff on the fuselage, but I do want it on my metal bits like the turret and the little kind of trim around the canopy. I don't want it on my glass, and I definitely don't want it on my bombs. Let's make another folder, and this one I'm going to call glass. And this one, I'm going to do just the opposite. I'm going to click on this guy. I'm going to say nothing on the fuselage, nothing on the metal bits, nothing on the bombs, but definitely yes on the glass. And last but not least, I'm going to create a fourth folder. I'm going to call this bombs. And once again, I'm going to go in here. I'm just going to say nothing on the fuselage, nothing on the metal bits, nothing on the glass, but definitely on the bombs. So, so let's say that I do want to assign some paint to my fuselage. So now all I have to do is let's try this green paint here. So I'm just going to click on this guy, and I'm just going to drag it, and I'm going to put it inside this fuselage folder. So when I do that, you will see that now Substance knows what pre-masking I have done because of this fuselage folder that I created, and now it's applying this green paint just to the fuselage part of it. Let's keep going. I'm gonna use this, I don't know, like ruined steel. This might be a little bit too harsh, but I'm gonna do this for the metal bits. So I'm just gonna click and drag it into my metal bits. Okay, so now we have just this metal smart material applied to the parts that I said that I wanted in this metal bits folder. Okay, let's do the same thing with glass. Let's just go in here and type glass. I know there's like a very simple glass. So I'm gonna go in here and I'm gonna once again drag this into my glass folder. So now it only covers this glass. And last but not least, let's do the bombs. And I don't know, like what are we gonna do for the bombs? Let's give it like, let's go maybe with just the painted metal for the bombs. I just want them to be all red. Okay, so now that we have these basic materials, I can go onto the business of kind of fine-tuning things a little bit better. So for instance, let's say that now I want to apply, I don't know, like some writing on my fuselage. Maybe I want to put like some markings on the wings. So let's see, I'm just going to create a new paint layer. And this paint layer I'm just going to drag up here because I don't actually want to mask it. I want to be able to kind of paint all over the place, okay? So I'm going to do a search for, here's a neat little trick that I learned. If you do a search for font, Substance gives you the ability of actually writing whatever text you want, you know, as a form of kind of like a brush. So I'm going to call this markings. Okay, I'm going to call this markings, and let's put this out of the way right now. And right now it just says, if you see this, it just says Substance. We don't want that, so I'm just going to scroll down to let's see here parameters, and I'm just going to change it. I'm just going to call it, I don't know, AG11 11B. Something like that. Something that kind of sounds remotely kind of military or whatever. And once again, I'm going to change this from perspective to orthographic view and line it up a little bit better and maybe make my brush a little bit larger. I'm just going to put this marking. Do I like this red? Let's go with something different. Let's go with maybe like a bit of more orangey yellow. So I'm just going to click on this guy, and now we have a marking on that wing. I'm just going to put it right here as well for some symmetry, okay? So let's do another paint layer, and this one I'm going to call dirt. And I want to change some things. I definitely don't want this bright orange color. I'm going to go more like in the darker, almost kind of black. And I definitely don't want the stencil. I do want to go with you know, maybe like this dirt. Okay, so let's see what happens if I start painting. And once again, like, you know, this on this dirt layer, I don't want any masks. I want to have the ability of painting all over my mesh without having to worry about whether it's going to not be able to paint one UDIM tile or another. So let's do that. Let's see, maybe I kind of make my brush a little bit smaller, and let's start kind of adding some dirt in some of these kind of sections right here of the fuselage. Maybe there's like a little bit of dirt here. Let's see here, maybe you know, put like a little bit of dirt here. Maybe there's some at the very tip. Okay, so however, before we move forward and we go back to Houdini, there's one thing that we need to do, and I want to show you guys specifically on this glass section right here, and let me get rid of the dirt right now so you can kind of see what the problem is. So right now our glass is not transparent, and the reason why is because we haven't told Substance Painter that we actually want an opacity value for these materials as well. And we need to address that because otherwise when we bring this UDIM set back into Houdini, the glass is actually going to be solid and it's not going to be transparent, and so we need like an opacity map. So let's do that in Substance Painter before we get into the exporting part of this tutorial. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change this PBR metal roughness to this PBR metal roughness with alpha blending. Okay, so this is the first step. We want to have, you know, some alpha blending for our materials. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here under our channels. Okay, so we have the channels right here. Hopefully you can see it as well as possible. And in these particular channels, what I want to be doing is I want to add an opacity channel, because right now we have base, height, roughness, metallic, normal. As you can see right here, color, height, roughness, metallic, normal, but we don't have an opacity map. So we need to add an opacity map to this. I'm just going to click on this plus button and I'm going to select opacity. We have a bunch of different options, but we want opacity. So now that we have opacity, you can see that immediately our glass became transparent. And then I'm going to add the dirt back, and the dirt has the same issue, which if I select it, the opacity right now is set to non-opaque at all. And I want to change this. I'm just going to change this opacity from pure white. I'm going to lower this towards dark until I start seeing through it. So just kind of bring it a little bit closer to dark, and okay, so now I can see through this glass a lot better, and this is gonna look a lot better in my final render, otherwise it wouldn't look like glass at all. Alright, so now that we sorted out our transparency issue with our material and the opacity, now we're ready to export. And what I'm going to show you is going to work both for this particular model as well as the Sci-fi canister example that we saw earlier. So let's go under the File menu and click under Export Textures, and we are seeing the screen, and it's got like this output template which just says PBR metallic roughness from cache. And I can tell you right off the bat this is not going to work. And the reason why it's not going to work is because naming conventions really are important for UDIMs, because your render engine is going to recognize which UDIM texture goes to which UDIM tile by the numbering system, okay? And if that number system is not on there, then it's going to get confused. So let me show you a little bit why this is not going to work. If I go under my list of exports, we'll see here that we have you know, all the different kind of pieces, parts of our textures being exported. So we have a base color, we have an emissive texture that we probably don't really need because we don't have any emission. We have height, we have metallic, we have normal, we have roughness. However, we don't really have any UDIM information on here. And then for the second tile, okay, tile number 1002, we now have some kind of random numbers assigned here, like base color 1, emissive 6, height 5, metallic 4. This is not going to work because when we bring these textures and connect them to our render engine is going to look at these names and it's going to see these weird numbers and it's not going to know what to do with them. So we need to fix this. So for my particular purposes, I have created my own output template from scratch. I'm not going to go too much into all the details of creating your output template. That's probably something that you can kind of find on a different material, specifically on Substance Painter. But I did want to show you what my output template does include. So it's got the name of the mesh. In this particular case, it's whatever my FBX file was called, which is Interceptor U_U. Then it's got like the type of texture that it's exporting, in this case like base color. And then last but not least, this is really like the really critically important part, is this $UDIM value, okay? Because what this is going to do is it's actually going to add the UDIM tile that our texture should go to, that will match to, okay? So let me show you. I'm going to go back to settings, and now I'm going to change this to the preset that I create, which in this particular case, it's for 3D Light, but honestly, it works for Redshift or Arnold or anything of that sort. I mean, this stuff is pretty straightforward. And if we now look at the list of exports, now you'll see that what my individual texture files are going to be called is Interceptor_U, which is the name of my FBX model. What particular texture this is, in this case, like base color or height or metallic or normal or opacity or roughness. But most importantly, it's going to have this information right here, which is what UDIM tile number this particular texture needs to be paired up with, okay? So this is very important, and I want to show you guys, if you don't want to create your own output template from scratch, like I did, one that works just fine is the PBR metallic roughness from Substance Painter does give you the proper numbering convention. It just adds this default material name to it, which is from our texture set list. I don't know, it just kind of makes the file name longer, but you know, maybe you don't really care about that. So definitely always look at the list of exports and make sure that these numbers at the end of your file name match your UDIM tiles, because otherwise, if you don't have these guys in here, it's going to be kind of like a mess on the back end, and you're going to have to go in and rename things, and then, you don't want to go there. And the other thing that I like to do is I don't like to use PNG, I like to use EXR, and I would highly, highly recommend that you guys consider not using JPEG and not using PNG, but actually just kind of using EXR. I think it's just like a great format. The other thing I want to change is the texture set size. I'm going to switch this to 4K. Now remember, we were working at a 2K resolution while we were assigning our textures, but this is just something for within Substance Painter, and now that we're exporting, we can actually kind of select whatever size we want up to 8K, which is currently supported from Substance Painter. I'm just going to click on export, and now Substance Painter, it's going to do its thing. The only other thing I'm going to mention before ending this tutorial is that in my experience, some render engines are very finicky about the file names, not just when it comes to, you know, these numbers that obviously match our textures to the UDIM tile that they belong to, but also on having the word UDIM anywhere in the file path. And I just want to mention this because some render engines might not care, but some render engines will, and 3D Light, for instance, does care. So when you're naming your folder, when you're naming your model, when you're naming, I don't know, anything that's going to be in the file path, you probably want to stay away from actually using the word UDIM as part of that, okay? So I wouldn't want, for instance, to change this folder to Interceptor, instead of Interceptor U, of calling it Interceptor UDIM, okay? Because if I do that, that's actually going to screw up 3D Light, and 3D Light's going to get confused. So avoid the word UDIM in your file path and you will be fine. Okay, I think that's going to do it for part 2 of this mini UDIM series of tutorials, and hopefully this gives you a good general overview of the workflow of UDIMs in Substance Painter. Of course, like Adobe has like a really, really great set of tutorials as well working with UDIMs in Substance Painter, and I would encourage you guys to check that out as well. So in part 3, we are going to take the textures that we generated in Substance Painter, go back into Houdini, and we're going to assign them to the shaders and hit render, and hopefully nothing blows up, and hopefully things look the way they're supposed to look like. And I'm also going to share some additional workflow tricks that I've learned that might give you some additional flexibility on the Houdini side, so that you don't have to go back to Substance Painter and change things there. So on that note, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in part 3.